Well, I would have perhaps not necessarily, contradicted Trump on his claims to have mediated or brought about the ceasefire, given his desire for credit and his vanity. I think contradicting him publicly on this, I think, was perhaps going to lead to some problems in the relationship.
For a long time, the Americans saw India as a democratic counterweight to China. By singling India out for punitive tariffs and pushing it closer to China, hasn't Trump scored an own goal? Is this something that the US could in fact pay a heavy price for? And is China the biggest winner in all of this?
Certainly, it puts China in a better position, but Trump's policy has vacillated between confronting China uh, to actually accommodating China. And at the moment, it is veering in favor of accommodation. And some analysts in the US feel that the tariffs on India are a signaling both to Russia as a warning and to China as an easing that the US does not seek to contain China or have a counterweight to China in Asia. So we have to wait and see, because at the moment, I would say there's little clarity about US China policy beyond the fact that Trump's initial efforts at putting heavy tariffs on China have had to be walked back, and they have extended the period for negotiations with China with a grace period up to November now, and 30% tariffs, US tariffs apply on China, which, along with the earlier tariffs which were there, mean roughly a tariff of about 51 or something percent. And I think China has some 10% tariff on the US as part of this interim arrangement till they work out a deal. So I think we have to wait and see, because last time also President Trump in his first term had worked out a trade deal with China. Then it was not implemented by the Chinese. The devil was in the details. I mean, they didn't implement it. So I think this time also, US policy will clarify based on how China responds to US.
Okay. Ma'am, is there significant India illiteracy in the Trump administration? They obviously expected India to cave in to the pressure. Do we need more effective lobbying efforts in Washington, for instance? I believe India has recently hired a couple of lobbying firms. Is that likely to help in your view?
I think you need a more concentrated effort to inform the public about India's position, but also you need to build bridges at other levels of the government, continue, keep the engagement going. Don't react emotionally. So I think a policy which I think India is following right now is, no confrontation, but no capitulation. So, and continued engagement. And we
Well,
hope that voices will prevail.
yes, you're quite right. I mean, I think India has shown a lot of restraint, and that's what mature democracies do. I wish somebody could tell Donald Trump that. But, ma'am, let me ask you this. The tariffs, many believe, could also have an adverse impact on the American economy. There are fears that the existing cost of living crisis in the US could worsen. Do you believe that that could emerge as a political headache for Donald Trump? Could the Republicans end up paying for it in the midterms next year?
Well, as of now, the economy has been holding up And that's because it's too early. It's very early days after the tariffs have been imposed, and a lot of shipments, front-loaded shipments, were sent by countries to the US in the anticipation that tariffs were going to kick in. So there is, surplus uh, warehoused material which is available, which will provide some relief maybe for a few months, but eventually there will be higher prices, and that cost will have to be paid by the US consumer. And given that, taming inflation was one of Trump's biggest promises during the election, it will exert pressure. Then you have the midterms coming up, where the House of Representatives will see fresh elections, and whether there are political changes there or not, we don't know. It's too early to say which way the wind is blowing, but that's another, eventuality which will have to be faced. In most cases, in the midterms, the ruling party has lost the House. The Democrats lost it, and so on. So it's a it's a difficult proposition to actually win a midterm election.
Okay.
So all these things will have their impact on U.S. decisions.
Most certainly. Now, ma'am, as we've discussed, most in India continue to be wary of China given our fraught history, um, and especially given China's support to Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. But at the same time, the question is, how do you deal with a narcissistic, irrational, and unreasonable man like Donald Trump? Do you believe the India US relationship could remain in the abyss till the end of the Trump presidency? That's the fear many have now.
Well, I would hope not. I would hope that both countries continue their engagement and try to find a via media. But that's possible only if the US also realizes that there are red lines that India has, which have to be taken into account. That we are willing to be accommodating, we are willing to go quite a distance in terms of uh, accommodating the US. But at the same time, I think the US would need to understand India's red lines in agriculture, and, not insist on having an entirely one sided agreement.
Ma'am, looking at the big picture, the tariffs are likely to have quite an adverse impact on Indian exports and economy. The India US relationship seems to have hit rock bottom. We live in a difficult neighborhood. We had a 100-day military conflict with Pakistan. How do you see India's foreign policy navigating these multiple challenges? Again, to quote Professor Mattu, he said, this is the biggest foreign policy crisis that he has seen India face. What's your view?
Yes, but I would say the biggest crisis was really 71, with the inflow of 10 million refugees from Bangladesh into India, with the Western countries ranged against India on the issue, refusing to use any kind of diplomatic leverage on Pakistan to get it to be more moderate in its policies vis-a-vis East Pakistan. I think that was really the most difficult period, and handled with aplomb. Uh, I hope that India emerges stronger out of this challenge, that we do take steps to improve the competitiveness of our manufacturing, which is the single biggest factor why we don't export so much all around the world. And that we, use this as a means to um, undertake these reforms with a sense of urgency, both in terms of we are already doing the GST, and then there are a whole range of factors which make the cost of doing business and manufacturing in India more expensive than other countries. We need to systematically address those, and you can't do it across the board, but you can do it in select sectors,
Yeah.
and then when that starts working, you expand. So it's something which probably a crisis can propel us to look at more seriously.
Absolutely. It is a time for sweeping economic reforms in India. Let's hope we do rise to the challenge. Ma'am, there is no doubt that Trump has dealt some massive blows to India as well as to the bilateral relationship with the United States. But some critics have termed recent developments a failure of India's foreign policy. How do you look at it?
Well, I would have perhaps not necessarily, contradicted Trump on his claims to have mediated or brought about the ceasefire. One could have handled it tactfully, given his desire for credit and his vanity. I think contradicting him publicly on this, I think, was perhaps going to lead to some problems in the relationship. And it's not a make or break issue for India to say that the US played a helpful role. You know, uh, it's something which we could have lived with. We needn't have contradicted him publicly. But having said that, I think there are domestic compulsions in India for this. But our Prime Minister is strong enough to have handled them. Let me put it like that.
Okay, that's certainly interesting. Ma'am, let me ask you this. As somebody who served as India's ambassador to the United States, you've been one of the chief stakeholders in the India-US relationship. If I may ask you, does it hurt you personally to see this critical relationship that both sides have worked so hard on for a quarter of a century hit rock bottom in this manner?
Obviously, it's not something I am happy about. It's not something which causes me to feel, that this is an achievement. It's something which, not just, I wouldn't say because it's something I have contributed towards, but more that for India, I do believe that a good relationship with the United States has helped to propel India's economic growth and development. And I think that is something which is still the case. There's no other economy which is in a position to substitute for the US economy in terms of the market that India has enjoyed. It's been our largest export market, um, largest source of technology, and largest source of financial and technological collaborations for our companies. So it's a pretty broad-based economic relationship. The services sector is one where the trade is broadly balanced and it's been growing. So if you take trade in goods and services together, it's about nearly $200 billion, with a $45 billion trade surplus for India, mostly in goods. On the services side, a $3 billion trade deficit. But then for the US, actually, also, it's irrational to attack India because it doesn't address their trade deficits. Their deficit with India is just $45 billion. And on an average, it's varied between 20 to 30 billion. I mean, last year was an exceptional year for India. So whereas you have deficits of $300 billion with other trading partners. So, how does it make sense, even in terms of US objectives, to actually hit a partner who really doesn't have such a huge surplus with you?
Okay, certainly that is something that needs to be addressed. But final question, ma'am, before we let you go, I wonder what you made of Trump's decision to nominate Sergio Gore as the next U.S. ambassador to India. He's of course somebody who has the year of Donald Trump, though he's not a career diplomat. But, there are those in India who are very skeptical about his appointment or his nomination because of his dual role as special envoy for Central and South Asia. There are those who are wondering whether this is the Trump administration trying to rehyphenate India with Pakistan. There are those who recall the Richard Holbrooke phase, which was seen as a rather rocky phase in the India-US relationship. Is that a concern that you have as well?
Look, with Richard Holbrooke, we were able to limit his remit to Afghanistan and Pakistan. So he was not special envoy to India, he was special envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan. So it was a limited remit in terms of the region. With Sergei Gore, I suppose he has Trump's ear, and we would have
Excuse
to
me.
take him on trust. But the fact that he will have divided responsibilities, I think, does leave a question mark. I do hope that when his appointment is confirmed and he comes, then that he works to establish confidence with the people and the government of India.
Final question, ma'am. As somebody who understands this relationship better than most others, one piece of advice that you have for the Indian government and one piece of advice for Donald Trump.
No, I don't think I want to give advice to either of them, but I think tone down the rhetoric, keep engaged, and keep focusing on areas of convergence, which are pretty large, and work your way through or around differences.
Well, let's certainly hope that sooner or later those differences can be buried, though right now it's just very hard to be optimistic about the India-US relationship given the heavy blows that have been dealt by Donald Trump and his administration. But it's always such a pleasure talking to you, ma'am. Ambassador Meera Shankar, thank you so much for joining me on Global Pulse.